Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Psychedelics Today. Really excited to have Carla Kieffer on the show today. We're actually recording live in Montego Bay here in Jamaica. We just wrapped up our first retreat here at Atman Retreats, and we are about to start our second one. So welcome to the show, Carla. Would love to have you introduce yourself to the audience and tell us a little bit about yourself.
Thank you. Thank you, Kyle. I'm very excited to be here. Big fan of Psychedelics Today. My name is Carla Kieffer. I am the founder of Kairos Integration. I am a certified psychedelic facilitator. So what that means is I work with people to prepare for, I help hold space during the journey, and then I help integrate their work afterwards.
Awesome.
Yeah.
And how did you get involved in this work? Because I know you said that you have a background in tech. Like, what was your transition like? And what were you doing in tech? And how did you get the call to step into this work a little bit more?
Yeah, no, it's been a beautiful journey and it's still going on. So I founded a tech company actually when I was 23 years old. And so worked in that space for a while, did some really, really amazing things, and was actually doing earthquake relief in Nepal, working with hempcrete, and we're using hempcrete to rebuild. Yeah, we're using it to rebuild afterwards, and it was just incredible to me to see a plant which I had used personally, medicinally, for help with anxiety and kind of coping when I was younger, and seeing how we were using that plant to rebuild, and such a powerful plant. So that was kind of a first sort of decision point for me to really support plants. And from there, I moved actually into the cannabis space, supporting companies. And from there, the transition was pretty easy into psychedelics.
Yeah, cool. And so you have your own integration practice now, and then you also work with Maya, right? With some data collection. And I wonder if you could just share a little bit about that too.
Thanks. Yeah. I'm community liaison for Maya Health. And what we're doing is collecting data around the psychedelic journey. So we will do measures beforehand and then after the experience to kind of show the efficacy of the medicine itself. One subpopulation I work with is veterans and first responders. And it's very much in need to demonstrate the outcome of the work, especially considering kind of the stakes with the work. So I'm very honored to support this.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, we need data, right? We really kind of need that to move forward and hopefully push the science for the politics.
Sure.
Which is exciting.
And the thing I love about data is it's like non-emotional, non-agnostic, and it really doesn't matter whether we do the work, where we do the work, or what medicine we work with. And I also want to name too, it's not just psychedelics as in plant medicines and such. There's also breathwork and meditation and all of that. So whatever we can do to affect the experience of someone and then show how it's affecting their life, I think it's valuable, whether it's to the larger audience or to the person themselves. Yeah.
And is the goal to collect that data to help with like policy change, to use that for that?
Yes. So just, collecting the data for whatever need it is. It's just in the past, I think one thing, we're standing on the shoulders of giants, certainly, but knowing that a lot of the work was done in the past when maybe we didn't have such strong technical capabilities to collect as much data as we can. And so if we can collect data anonymously and protect the people that we're collecting the data from and use that data to demonstrate something, I think that can go very far.
Yeah. And what type of things are you looking at?
Some of the measures that we use specific to the veteran population are, for example, the PHQ-9, which is depression. So depression, anxiety, GAD-7. And we also look at the ACE score ahead of time and a couple other measures after. And then we'll start to see over time changes in those measures.
Awesome. Yeah, it's exciting. And then you do some, I guess, like part of the scene down in Texas too, like helping with some of the research down there with vets, right?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, we have the UT Dell Medical Psychedelic Center and just rolling out some of the studies that we'll be doing for veterans. They'll be done in Mexico and different countries. So measuring one of the studies I'm thinking of off the top of my head is an extended grief. So for the veterans who have lost someone to either war or suicide.
Yeah, that's amazing. And you were telling me a little bit earlier that the way that bill was written, that any vet can go to Texas and engage in like, a ceremony? Does it have to be in a research context, or like what would, if somebody was wanting to like participate in research and they're a vet, like how do they go about doing that?
Yeah. So the way the bill was written was that they can participate in research. And so that has to be some sort of research. There are other research centers coming up. So I believe Baylor has one and a couple others as well. So as long as they're participating in research, which it's sort of yet to be defined what that looks like exactly.
Citizen science.
Exactly. Personal research. No, it does actually have to be a research project. Yeah. So it's exciting just to give the space for people to come, I think is really important. And I do think this is a very important subpopulation to work with.
Yeah. So you have your hands in a lot of different projects, a lot of different things, just thinking about, the research side of things, what you're doing with like Maya, you're doing the facilitation down here in Jamaica with Atman, you have your integration. Like what excites you the most? Like, where do you like to kind of put your energy, or I'm sure it's everywhere, but yeah. What excites you the most about working in the psychedelic world?
Yeah, that's a great question. Thank you. I always say like I'm like a hummingbird and kind of pollinating across from the science to the spirituality and the business and all of the pieces that I've had from my past. But the thing that excites me the most is helping people and like being a resource for them. And some people will reach out to me and they don't necessarily end up doing a journey, or it's not the right time. And so I'm really honored to be able to, based on my knowledge and experience, to share data that might resonate with certain people in certain groups. And so that feels really good. I'm also teaching, which is kind of what we're doing down here, and helping other people who are interested in this work, train them and help them be able to hold space so that we can have more and more people doing this work, because there's so many need. Like I have a very long waiting list of people that need to go places. And so if we can train one person and that person can work with 10 people, we can exponentially see how we as a mycelium can start to have so much more access to these medicines.
Yeah. Well, I guess on the topic of training, I'm maybe curious to hear, like, where do you think education needs to go in this field? Like, we know that it's important. There's going to be a bottleneck, especially in the clinical services. I'm excited to see how Oregon, Colorado, and maybe some of these other states unfold. Like, where do you see education be really important? And like, how do we go about training people for this work?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it kind of depends on the way. I also am very interested to see the path that the states take. And I think it really depends on, what the person wants to do in that space, right? So I believe there should be some baseline principles around harm reduction practices and, how to help people have safe space. And by safe, I mean just physically safe space to be in. I think after that, it's kind of wide open. It also depends on the people's background, what your background is. So if you have a skill or a talent that you feel like could be super helpful, that lens and that perspective could be very helpful to certain people. So I think there's also another piece to finding the right person to work with, right? And so by that, it's important to have a lot of people trained, because there's going to be a lot of people that are interested in doing this work. And how can we connect the right people? Yeah.
You talking about like, I guess like skills and what people are doing also makes me think that people engaging in education have other opportunities right now, right? Like not just going down, say like working with these medicines in a facilitator manner, or even becoming like an integration specialist. But I mean, even being like a researcher, a podcaster, like, just being educated around psychedelics, having kind of like those competencies and literacies. So like people are able to, provide good information to their communities, right? Because I think that's how we're going to start to shift things, right? It's like the more education, the more people can understand this from a different perspective than just like, all the all the fear that came from the 60s and everything, because we are still battling with a lot of stigma, right? And it's gonna, it's actually really exciting to see how fast some of the policies are changing. I didn't think I would ever see what happened in Oregon in my lifetime or that quickly, so we're gonna need a lot of people out there educated. And so whether it may not be the facilitator way, but a practitioner of some sort, right? Just showing up in the community and being able to support all sorts of different projects.
Yeah. And I think that's a really good point, in that you can bring your talent, whatever your talent is, and we can normalize these conversations. And even afterward, after people go through the journey, like integration can mean so much, but having groups and community groups and whatever it is, you do bring that magic and bring like a psychedelically informed conversation to your offering, I think is really important.
Yeah.
And exciting.
Yeah. So tell me a little bit how you got involved with Atman and doing the work down here in Jamaica.
Yes, I'm very, very grateful to Jamaica, the land itself, land of the Taino. I'm very grateful that they currently have it's legal here to do the work. And so we have a container here where we're able to do retreats. They're mainly psycho-spiritual retreats. So we have people come in and they'll do a journey with us. We have preparation beforehand, and then the journey itself and the integration. And it's about 4-day journey, which is nice. A lot of people can get away, so it's accessible for that. And we have facilitators come in from all over the country, all over the world, actually, to support, which is really nice. And I've been working in this space, facilitated quite a few journeys since 2019. So very excited to do it down here in Jamaica. I've also worked in Costa Rica as well with ayahuasca, another country where able to do this work in a way that feels really good.
Yeah, it's interesting to come down here and be able to do this work in a legal manner, right? And I wonder how that also impacts a journeyer's experience, right? Thinking about the drug war, how much fear may be in our bodies of am I going to get in trouble, right? Versus being in a place, because it sounded like from my hearing lots of people talk about the legality here, it's it was just never made illegal here, so there's just no rules around it, and that's cool. And I guess the other thing, I forget if we've been talking about it, but I know it's come up, just white people coming to Jamaica to offer these services, right? And it's you can feel kind of the cultural history here of the colonialism, and I always think about this too, but it seems like Jamaicans and the Jamaican culture also really appreciates the tourism. Yeah. And so I find it to be an interesting kind of balance of coming down here and having the laws legal to be able to do this, but then also does this feel right all the time? And I don't know, I wonder if you think about that at all too.
I do. I think about that often. We come down here and we spend money and work with retreat centers and allow access. And I know in my time down here, I've talked with a lot of local people, and I believe personally that maybe an education campaign would be good to really explain psilocybin. With the Rastafarian culture, there's awareness around cannabis, ganja, as a medicine, but psilocybin is fairly new to them. And so one thing that feels good for me is I've been training actually local facilitators to be able to have access to these medicines. And
Amazing.
I believe that will really help kind of, again, what we talked about, normalize the languaging, and for people who want to have access to these experiences, to do it in a way that feels good for them, culturally and all that feels really good. So I'm hopeful that we don't just come down here, do the work and leave, that we leave with planting seeds, if you will, and perhaps some healing and transformation as it may be.
Yeah. It was cool that we went on that little excursion to the cultivator, and it sounded like, they're Jamaican, and they actually went around their communities to try to educate, their community around this type of medicine. And it didn't seem like everybody was receptive to it, but at least that's happening. And I think that's really important. And also probably a challenge too, because again, it sounds like there was some kind of taboo here around associated with witchcraft, or maybe, these mushrooms are poisonous. poisonous. And so people seem to also be afraid of them. As in most cultures, right?
Yeah. Well, I think too, even in the United States, we have some of that as well, right? So it comes down to that data conversation of like, 100 people did it, 98 had this result, and you can kind of start looking at what it really means. But in the end, I think it's a very personal decision, and having access to like non-biased data is really helpful and important.
Yeah. So. And I think maybe it was Gordon Watson that said this. It's just like, a lot of cultures just have like a microphobia, right? And it's not just with psilocybin mushrooms, it's with all mushrooms because, there's a lot that are poisonous out there. So, you go out there, it's like, oh, you don't pick any mushroom because it could be poisonous. And I think that's just like probably worldwide to some degree. I mean, there's some obviously cultures that really thrive on eating mushrooms for their cuisine. But, I know, growing up just in New Jersey, it was like, don't pick mushrooms, this and that. It's like, could be poisonous. And I even kind of had that like microphobia. I'm like, oh no, like, like
it's real.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think too, it's like maybe mushrooms are getting rebranding.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, after watching Fantastic Fungi, I definitely believe that. Have you seen that movie?
Oh, it's so good. Yeah. Louis Schwarzenbereg.
Yeah.
I was at Burning Man and they did the premiere out there.
Oh,
it was so magical.
Yeah.
Like, a lot of people were there. It was just really nice to sit on playa watching this movie, which was a treat in and of itself and so beautiful. So,
and I think like documentaries and stuff like that help to change the narrative. I don't know how many people have come up to me after that. They're like, have you seen Fantastic Fungi? And I liked how it was a balance. It wasn't just psychedelic related. It was, mycology in a whole, looking at mushrooms in a whole. And there's so many applications and it's like, there's such interesting species.
Yeah. So much to learn.
Yeah. So we came down here, partnered with Atman for our Vital Retreat. I would love to hear maybe a little bit about your experience because this was something a little bit different that Atman tried, right? Like we came down here, we did this journey or sitter pair, and it sounded like it was the first time that, Atman kind of did something like this. And I would love to hear like, how is that for you? And how is that maybe different than some of the other retreats? And maybe something that you learned from the experience, you've taken away from it?
Yes. Well, first off, it was an amazing experience to have the experiential portion being done here. Usually we just have retreats, we have retreats where people come in, they do the prep, we have them do the journey and then integration and it's done. And so in this scenario, we had one sitter for one person doing the journey and then they would switch, which was really interesting because one, I saw like much deeper relationships being formed and a lot of people have pre-existing relationships from training. So it was interesting to see that. Normally at Atman or other retreats, it's 10 strangers, right? Or 12 or whatever the capacity is. And so I'm always interested in watching how the people connect so quickly, right? It's such a vulnerable space to be in. But with the training that we did, I saw some really big connection and energetic exchanges. So that was one thing that was really interesting to watch. The other piece that for me was really good as a psychedelic educator was to learn, right? To learn from people. A lot of your students are from very different backgrounds. And oftentimes the Atman Retreat, it's people who are new to psilocybin and want to do a legal experience. And so they're just kind of receiving and there's a lot of guiding in that way. But with our group, it was a lot of exchange of information. And so I was able to really see and witness, different perspectives, which was really helpful. So we had the base foundation of, harm reduction and kind of best practices there. But to have the one-on-one support was really, really sweet to see how that worked.
Yeah. And I guess like group energy wise, did you notice there might've been a difference of like everybody journeying at the same time versus like having those sitters there?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, one thing for me that I've always noticed when I facilitate is I feel like I'm on the medicine.
Yeah.
And so with that much energy and with people, facilitating or with myself facilitating with other facilitators, there was a lot of energy in the room. But it was really interesting in our integration sessions for the space holders to share their experience as well as the journeyers and to hear kind of their experience as well. Because for me, it was a lot of energy in the room. And was beautiful. It was absolutely beautiful. When I do my training, I usually have like 4 people total. So a group of 2 and same context, but just a much smaller group. So yeah, it was pretty magic. And here we are on this beautiful beach and nature and, all the noise and all the things. So it was just beautiful.
Yeah. Yeah, we got these things popping on the roof. It's interesting. This kind of comes from our breathwork training where we do this breather sitter pair. And I think besides the retreat in Amsterdam, really kind of the first time we've really applied this to kind of psychedelic journeys in a group space like this. And I do find it to be really interesting, right? Like, I think for some people having that extra support there to go to the bathroom, be there, like it is really nice, right? Because when you are in a group space and it's just facilitators, maybe you don't always get that one-on-one attention, right? And having that sitter there kind of provides that. I think the tricky thing in groups is, and we didn't really see that much around the talking, but it's like, does that foster kind of like talking, and then does that bring everybody else out? And I think that's the one thing to try to manage at times. And we have to do that in breath work too. Sometimes somebody comes out and they really want to talk to their sitter, but then you got to really be mindful of the whole group and try to limit that. But yeah, it does provide a very like intimate kind of experience. And then for the training piece, and I'm just going to speak from my own experience, like sitting for somebody, like it brings up a lot. And I think a lot of this work is really about sitting with yourself. You have interventions, you have different things to do when certain situations, but like really, I think the point of being like that sitter there is sitting with yourself, noticing how you're somatically getting activated, noticing like what's going on in the room, feeling all that energy, learning how to kind of take care of yourself. Because, if you are going to be stepping into this work, that's pretty much what you're dealing with, right? You're dealing with a lot of like transference, counter-transference stuff. And then you have to deal with what's going on in your body and, thinking about like, why do I want to intervene right now? Right. Why do I want to do this? Should I? And yeah, that sitting experience, I think, helps provide it. And I know there's so many times just sitting with breath work, it's like, oh, I want to, reach in and try to help this person. I'm like, oh, wait, let me pull back for a second. Why do I want to do that? Yeah. Oh, I'm noticing I'm kind of uncomfortable right now. Yeah. I feel like I want to help. Yeah. Right. And so I think that kind of like this type of framework provides a little bit of that. And I think sometimes people are like, oh, like might be boring. And sometimes it is, right? You're sitting for like 6 hours at least. And sometimes it can, it's physically kind of exhausting sitting. But that's also the reality that psychedelic therapy is going to have, right? Like exactly. Psilocybin therapy, MDMA, you're going to be sitting for a while with somebody individually. Yeah. And I think that's eye-opening for a lot of people.
For sure. Yeah. I love that you named that. And I love that Psychedelics Today offers this opportunity for people to try it, because a lot of people, there's a lot of conversation about, I want to do this work, And my first offering is to volunteer to do it, to just see and to sit and observe and see how it is, because it is a lot of sitting. And I think too, being a sitter and doing this work, whether you're sitting or journeying, it's actually the bigger issue is it's how you show up in life as well, right? You named it. Why do you want to give someone a tissue? Why do you want to fix the blanket? Why do you want to, kind of come into someone else's journey? If I think more macro about that and how we exist in our day-to-day, some people exist in their day-to-day of wanting to kind of interfere or not interfere, but go into someone else's journey. And it's like, if we could hold space for each other to have our own experiences, I think there might be a lot of learning on both sides, right? And the other side of that is a journeyer. You named, you've got someone who is there literally for your every need. So, you need it, you name it, they'll do it. They'll get you a tissue, they'll help you walk to the bathroom, they'll get you water. And so I think that can really allow you to go deeper into the journey, because you don't have to worry, oh, are they going to see me if I raise my hand? And, oh, am I going to be a bother? Because you probably, a lot of people haven't had that kind of support maybe ever in their life, or certainly not since they're little babies, where there's someone waiting to see what you need. And I think as a journeyer as well, we encourage journeyers to be sovereign and like figure out how they can support themselves, which again is a great life lesson. It's like, what do I need in this moment? And then you've got someone there, if you name it, and they can support you in that space. So I think this journeying experience and this space holding experience is really good life lessons, life journeys.
Yeah. And you mentioned just like when in life is somebody showing up for you, maybe the last time was a baby, right?
Hopefully.
And what was that?
Hopefully.
Yeah. But just having that space, right? For like somebody just giving you attention for at least 6 hours.
Yeah.
People take breaks and go eat lunch, but like to have that. And so it always makes me think about the whole container of what we're doing here at times. And substance is one part, the medicine's the one part, but it's also that experience of being held in a container, being heard, being witnessed. And I think we also have to acknowledge that about this type of work, right? Like just even if it is individual therapy, like if it's a psilocybin or MDMA, it's like when do you have somebody just there for you for 6 hours, giving so much attention to every little need? And, does that have a healing quality to it? And, I think with some of that, when I did some of the MDMA training way back when, I think Michael and Annie were saying sometimes they didn't know, like they got tricked maybe once or twice. Somebody was on a placebo and they thought it was MDMA, but thinking about the music, the internal journey, being supported, does that have an effect on people?
Yeah. I think it must, right? The data would show that it does. Yeah. And again, like how can you do that in your life, right? Show up for people and support and name what you need and really feel held by each other. I have visions of communities and spaces as we move forward with psychedelics and psychedelic awareness where people can actually like actively listen and kind of avoid the need to interject and any competitive talking goes away and all of that. And then, I think that in turn will just like reverb into the rest of the world and the interactions where you know that you're held in this space and you know that you're actively being listened to. And I think that can just kind of raise the elevation of everyone, raise the consciousness of people.
Yeah. Have you had any, I guess, challenges doing some of this work down here where people have a hard time with that interdirective approach? And like, I don't know, have you thought about like other models or thought about like, could there be other ways of working? Because I know this interdirective approach is really kind of like, what everybody's kind of basing some of it off of, right? Like that's kind of how Stan operated. That's like what the MDMA research is really kind of basing off of, this like eye shades, interdirected approach, stick with the process. But I don't know, have you found times where it is important to maybe intervene, have conversations, maybe be a little bit more relational at times?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's part of the experience is no journey is ever the same, right? We could show up and wear the same clothes and sit in the same spot and take the exact same amount, and your journey will be different every time. So I think it's really important to be reactive to the individual and their needs, right? And then also we always say like, guide, not lead, right? And so if someone's asking you a question and they want to talk, obviously you can't ignore them, right? That would bring up all sorts of other trauma. But how can you, support them in a way that is good for their journey? And if they need to go outside and get some fresh air, do that, and, make sure they don't fall down and all of that stuff. I think too, the conversation is also when you're doing it in a group experience, like a retreat setting, like we are here, versus an individual experience. So I think that goes back to really having good preparation practice about what that individual needs. If they're not comfortable in a space with other people, or if they know that they want to talk a lot, that might be a better example of doing a private journey one-on-one. Or if someone really wants to be outside, that might be good, but you can't bring 10 people outside, right? So really, I think that goes to the preparation part of this. And that's one thing I'm seeing is there's so many beautiful documentaries and so much information coming about how helpful all this can be. And so people just want to come down and do it. And I honor that, but I also think the person themselves can take time to educate themselves about what to expect and know the different options and figure out what they need. So, but in the end, the journey, you never know. You can control certain things, and you can do all that. But in the end, you just kind of have to trust in the medicine and trust in your experience and just support and show up.
So I know you're really big on data and you say you're a scientist, but also kind of like, you have that like spiritual side. When you say trust, like how does that science part of your mind conceptualize that? Because that is hard, right? People are like, what is that inner healing intelligence? How do you trust the inner process? What does that even mean? Can you measure it?
Yeah, no, that has been very much a part of my journey. I used to be a programmer, right? So I'd think very logically, very data driven. I train with internal family systems with IFS Institute, and there's a lot of conversation about parts and parts work. And that was really insightful for me because I see there are parts of me that very much trust in data. And then there's very much a part of me that's sat in the jungle and experienced things that I cannot put in ones and zeros, right? That doesn't work. But I love that my higher self kind of brings them together, right? And they work in symbiosis. And sometimes if I'm too far on one side, I bring out the part of me that understands, the data. And in the end, just being open to it all, right? Because as we named here, we're learning. This is a new, for us, this time around, new. And there's no right way to do it, but we can learn from each other. And I believe that's the mycelial way of doing this, is learning from each other.
There's no right way to do that. I'm sure that probably causes a lot of anxiety for people.
Yeah.
And I wonder if you could, talk about that a little bit more, because we are in this really interesting time where it's starting to come back around. Western culture doesn't really have a history of much psychedelic use. And, I think a lot of people do lean on indigenous cultures for kind of understanding, their framework and narratives around this. But we are at this time where things are starting to blend, right? A lot of people are blending indigenous practices with science. And I think we're at this really interesting point where we get to kind of explore a little bit more. Yeah. And I know that's going to cause a lot of anxiety for people because they're like, no, there's got to be a right way to do it. Right.
Yeah. No, I agree. I think about this often because there are many ways. We're standing on the shoulders of giants. We're honoring, we sit in circles and honoring of indigenous ways. I think all of it is important. And I think the blending of that can be really beautiful. But to say there's just one way, I don't even know who would, rock, paper, scissors on that one. There's, for me, I think for me, and this is what I teach, is there's tenets around harm reduction principles, right? And safety and physical safety.
Can you talk about those tenets a little bit?
Yeah. So definitely, the physical safety part is a big one. We're in altered states. So you want to be very careful that people don't fall, hit their heads. If there's any steps or uneven grounds, we want to make sure people stay hydrated, safety in that way. Also, the space in which they journey needs to be very, soft and pillows and things like that. So, people can express themselves somatically without worried about hitting their head or falling. I think as well, there's also safety for the sitter, the space holder as well, to make sure that they are, comfortable and safe and all of that. But yeah, I think it's important to honor the indigenous ways of doing things as well. They had safe practices too, right? And so how can we bring it all together? And again, I don't know that there is one right way besides some baseline things. And then also we need to think too, what medicine we're working with. And there's other novel compounds that are now coming out and what that's going to look like. We don't actually have a lot of history on that. We have ideas about it and we're learning again, but it's what I love about this work. It's just, you just never know what's coming next. So
exploring uncharted territories, even though you have a map, but the territory is always changing, right?
Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. I had a question and it just escaped my mind. Oh, yes, I know what I was going to ask. This is more of a general question, but since, we're here on a Vital Retreat, and we kind of ran this series called Vital Psychedelic Conversations, which we're kind of bringing back as well. So I wonder, what is a vital psychedelic conversation you think we should be having right now as a community field? What do you think is the most important topic?
Oof.
I know there's many.
Yeah,
but
hard to pick just one, but the first one that popped to mind was accessibility. So I think it's really important for everyone to have safe access to this medicine. And legal access to this medicine comes to mind. And everyone from whatever socioeconomic status, whatever background, I think that's really important because we can't just have people who can, for example, fly to Jamaica and take 7 days off from work or life. be the only people who access this. I think my vision, my goal, my idea would be that everyone have safe, equal, equitable access to this without cost being a barrier.
Mm-hmm.
And that includes, everyone. And I'm not saying that everyone's going to use them, and it may not be for everyone, but for anyone to be able to say, like, you can do this and you can't do this for whatever reason, be that financial or access where your zip code is, or any of that feels really limiting to me.
So what would that look like to you?
Yeah, well, I can break it down. Like, the legal part obviously is important. So legal access. So we're doing this work in an environment that allows us to, legally do it, right? That's number one. So there's no scarcity around, like, where do we do it? Where's the space? Is anyone going to get in trouble for this? And then I think that helps normalize the conversation. Like, you can freely say, I did this journey last weekend and this is what's going on for me, versus like, you did what? So as far as the financial piece, I don't have the answer to that. I don't know. I think a lot of the work that I do is donation, or just I volunteer. There are real costs associated with this. There's, you have to have a space to do this in. I mean, I think everyone should be growing mushrooms because
it's a very sustainable crop. Right?
Exactly. Yeah, for sure. Yeah. But then there's also education on what kind of mushrooms and make sure they're good and all that. So I don't really know the answer to that.
So legal framework. So these substances are legalized maybe, which means you could grow them. And then so we'll just use Oregon and maybe Colorado, for example, right? Because these are the frameworks that we're looking at. Do they need to be done in a service center? Could people grow at home and use them in, away with their family, their friends? Do they need, I think this was like Rick Doblin's idea. Maybe it came from Tim Leary first, but, do they need a driver's license or a psychonaut license to say, you can take this at home, you've been through education? So I don't know, have you thinking about deepening that framework a little bit, like what would an ideal model look like?
Yeah. I loved Rick's idea about kind of that psychonaut driver's license idea. And as an educator, I think there should be some base kind of core principles that everyone has around safety of how to access and use these medicines. The service center thing is interesting. I was in Oregon this last summer, watching all that come about. Yeah, I don't know. I see the need for it just from the standpoint of it's new and we need to figure out how to do it, but I don't exactly know how that's going to play out. I'm curious. I'm curiously watching without attachment. But I do think that in a perfect world, you would be able to have access to medicines in your home in a safe space, kind of that more recreational type thing. And then maybe there's a space for more therapeutic if you're doing deep trauma work, things like that, where you're working in a space with someone who has that experience. As far as geographically where that is, I'm not sure. Yeah. Then I also think about, like, should LSD be recreational? There's like conversation there that I don't know. My main work is with psilocybin. And so I feel very knowledgeable in that space and could speak to that. And I see it as having a use at home and recreational and all that. And certainly with growing your own and knowing your medicine and all of that being a really beautiful opportunity.
I remember when Joe and I did the interview with Stan Groff, he was, suggesting, I hope in the future you could take LSD and go swimming. Yeah. I'm like, I don't know, maybe that's a little risky, but or something like that. Go for a hike. But LSD is interesting, and I wonder if we'll ever get there culturally. Like, it is really kind of the first psychedelic for modern Western society, right? Our teacher, Lenny Gibson, has written some papers and made some comments around the production of LSD was really interesting culturally, because before that, you had to go out and collect plants. You had, some sort of narrative around that. You had to go actually forge it. LSD comes on the scene. I mean, you can make thousands and thousands and thousands of hits of LSD, and then it's just available. Right. And when in human history has that been so widely available with, because it's so potent, right? And it's a really interesting thing to think about of like, before you had to go out and collect plants or mushrooms and whatnot, and maybe the supply was limited or wasn't always there versus kind of more of this pharmaceutical approach where now it's like accessible, you can synthesize it, make it available. And, that's really, really kind of interesting. And, can we develop a new relationship with that? Like could LSD is pretty long lasting. I think that's, some people love that. I think it's also a downside to it.
It's a commitment.
You're signing up and you're committing. That's a long ride to wait. But yeah, I wonder if, we will like explore that compound. I know, like, I think it was the California bill, they took off synthetic substances where they were trying to get that, I think ketamine, MDMA and LSD decriminalized. But yeah, it's like we don't want to have anything to do with that, probably because of our history with it in the 60s, and it just has so much stigma. But
I'm still thinking of your teacher who said want to go swimming with LSD or maybe a hike. I think of there's this path up in India. It's I'm drawing a blank on the name of it. Pavarotti Valley. And you go from India into Nepal and you can do LSD and there's sages along the way to guide you. And so I'm just envisioning some version of that where it's like LSD friendly hikes, and there's space holders along the way. And
how many people are already doing that?
Sure. Yeah. Right? I hope there is someone. I know I know of a group that's working with LSD for, kind of mind expansiveness. And like, for me, it's a very precise medicine. So you can like whiteboard and think of ideas. And yeah, I know a lot of tech people may have access or may have experience with using LSD for creating things and all that. We obviously have a lot of history around that, but
And then now we're getting off topic and just thinking more big picture things. Like, how do you think this is going to impact the culture? Like mass psychedelic use, like culturally, like, what do you think is going to happen? Are things going to transform? Are things going to get a little bit more chaotic? I think, what was it last night? We were talking about, everybody wanting to like quit their regular jobs. I don't want to be a lawyer anymore. I don't want to be, this. I want to become a facilitator. And it's like,
I think, yes, all of the above. Chaotic, expansiveness. I don't know. I think that's why it's so important to have people that are trying to know or trying to understand this. But my prayer is that we create more connection, right? More human connection. I think these last few years, at least for me and a lot of my clients, have taught how important it is to be connected, right? The being disconnected is, just, I can't even imagine. So I'm hopeful that the future, we're more connective, we're more heart open, we're actively listening to people. I imagine our art's going to be crazy. You start looking at your Instagram feed. It's like, okay, this person's on a journey, literally. Yeah.
Then we got to deal with the AI generated stuff now.
Exactly. Yeah. But I also hope that we still honor the medicine and honor this. There is a history. We're standing on the shoulders of giants. So I don't want to forget that. I want to honor the medicines, the plants, the people who have come before us, our ancestors. Us having access to this is an absolute privilege and honor and I think we really have to be good stewards of that. So I'm hopeful that we can create spaces where we can do that.
Anything you're worried about or any concerns?
Yeah. Again, I think it becoming, it's growing so quickly. And so becoming an industry, there's a lot of, people that are jumping into it. And we always talked about in cannabis, it was the green rush, and now it feels like the rainbow rush, right? And like you start to see people that are creating products and services around this. And I think that's great. I appreciate entrepreneurialism, but I also think, these are very strong medicines and these are very, very, in my opinion, sacred experiences. So I think there's a time and a space to honor that. And I want to make sure that continues to happen.
So you spent time in the cannabis world, and there are people kind of correlating the psychedelic movement, comparing it to cannabis. How do you kind of interpret that? And do you see any differences, similarities there, and the concerns and whatnot?
Yeah, I think one thing that's just interesting to note data, right, is that, cannabis is still federally illegal.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's still a lot of, challenges in that space with 280E and other things with people who are
What's that?
It's where a law where you're not able to write off a lot of things like traditionally. And there's obviously a lot of cash issues as well, where, banking issues, financial issues. And just naming that, noticing that now we're going state by state again, and even jurisdiction by jurisdiction again. With Oregon, there were some groups that wanted to opt out certain jurisdictions. So it seemed divisive, right? And so just noting that it was similar in the way, like some states still are not legally able to access cannabis. So yeah, I'm noticing some similarities there. Yeah, so it's be interesting to see.
Yeah. And, cannabis is, sometimes people develop those daily habits. I mean, I think with psychedelics, people aren't going to be, besides probably microdosing, it does feel like a way different type of field. And it's always interesting to hear people kind of correlate to cannabis, but it's like, these are way different substances.
For sure.
Even though cannabis can be psychedelic at times.
For sure,
right?
Yeah.
But yeah, it's interesting. And it's going to be interesting to just watch it all unfold and be part of it.
Exactly. I'm excited to be here. I'm grateful to be here.
Yeah. So I think we're probably at time. I wonder if there's anything that we didn't touch on that feels like still wants to be talked about or shared, or any last thoughts that you might be having.
Just expressing gratitude for this opportunity to just talk about this. Again, I think that's so important, is we're able to normalize these conversations. And then, we talk about integration, and I really hope and I offer that integration is not just a thing. Like you do it, okay, you did the journey, now you integrate, and it's done. I think, and I hope that we can this becomes part of our lives, this integration, this idea of like checking in with ourselves and mindfulness and all of that, versus having, okay, I'm going to integrate for 3 weeks after I do my journey and then go back to life. Yeah. So I just really want to name that as how important it is to integrate all of this into
how do you conceptualize integration? And I like that you're bringing this up. It's like not something that you do. I did a presentation on integration for Vital last week, and I did kind of name that as well, right? And it's like sometimes I think the way that we're talking about it's like this thing that you need to do. Mm-hmm. But also it's a lifelong process.
Right.
And so I wonder how you kind of conceptualize integration and how you work with clients that way.
Yeah. So I always say like this journey starts the minute you start considering doing the medicine. We do our intake call and all of that. And then of course the journey itself, but integration is the part that is going on the whole time. It's kind of running in the background. And, I think for me, it's really important just to know that it's going to continue your whole life. You might work with more plant medicines. You might, move on to another modality, but, how do you bring these lessons, and I finger quote lessons, because it's not like, 2 + 2 is 4, but, insights, downloads, whatever word resonates with you. How can you then in your day-to-day become more mindful of this particular thing? Maybe you have an insight about the way you communicate with people and why that might be. And just sort of allowing it to have you live a life that feels more complete and full, right? And remembering in the end, like you are the medicine, right? Whether you're working with psilocybin or LSD or breathwork, but these are just ways to access your true self, your higher self, whatever resonates for you. Mm-hmm. And to really then, as you move through life, as you have these journeys, whatever they may be, just continuing to kind of integrate that into your life and integrate that into your higher self, or again, whatever resonates for you there.
Something you mentioned about moving on from the medicines, like maybe you do it more, maybe you move on from it, has me thinking something. I think we did an episode with Jeremy Narby, and there's a point in the interview where he said, how many times do you need to take ayahuasca? He's like, sometimes one ayahuasca session can give you a lifelong lessons, just like lifelong stuff to chew on. And I think this is an interesting conversation. Like, how much do we engage in the medicine? And obviously it's so personal, right? It depends what's going on with somebody and, their relationship with it. But it is an interesting thing of like being in the quote unquote psychedelic world. How much do you engage with these medicines? And what happens if you get the message and you want to hang up the phone for a little bit?
Yeah.
It's like,
Yeah, right. That's the work, like to listen to that message.
Yeah.
Is knowing that that came from somewhere within. Again, you are the medicine, right? But yeah, I think for me, it's so much content. It's so much. And for me and for clients, it's like, it'll come over time. You don't get everything in the first week and here you go. It's in a present and it's given to you. I've had stuff come up 6 months later. I'm like, oh, that's what that was about. So yeah, I also think if we have access to medicines where it's not this scarcity mindset, like, oh, I'm going to go to Peru and I need to do 3 journeys because I'm there and I'm already, there. But if it's readily available, and maybe then that might change the narrative of like, oh, I'm going to drink ayahuasca as much as I can because I can now do it, or there's this journey going on, or this circle. So, but again, I do believe we should be mindful with it. These are very powerful things. And so continuing to do it, it's like, what are you doing?
Well, it's interesting too, just thinking about we talk about community a lot in Vital and just, I think the psychedelic world and the need for that. But what happens when your community is just surrounded by taking medicine and doing inner work all the time? And then what happens when you do get that message like, oh, wow, I just actually need to do some work that isn't psychedelic related. And, then how do you relate to that community, right? You definitely see this with people that are struggling with substance use and they decide to stay sober. And then, all of a sudden, they have a weird interaction with their friends and their peer network all of a sudden, right? It's like, oh, you don't do that anymore. And
yeah, you see that sometimes. And I think that maybe, hopefully, as we evolve in our use of psychedelics and active listening and space holding for each other, we honor that path, right? We honor that I've gotten the call, I'm going to hang up. And it doesn't mean that our relationship has to change, you know? And I think that goes back to this bigger picture of understanding each other and being able to see each other in these different states of being. Yeah, it's a journey.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, thank you for that. Where can people find you? Do you have an online presence at all or anything else that you want to close with?
Thank you. Yes, I have Kairos Integration. We'll probably drop the link in there. That is I offer prep and facilitation and integration services. I also do the experiential training that we talked about. I have some social media presence, but obviously it's a bit delicate. But yeah, happy to share my email, and it's connect@kairosintegration.com.
How you spell Kairos?
Kairos integration.com. And Kairos is, it's a Greek word for the perfect moment of change.
Ooh, I like that.
Yeah, me too.
I love that.
So thank you.
Yeah, thank you for being here. It's been a pleasure and awesome to just partner up and be part of this retreat together. It's been a blessing.
Yeah. Gratitude.
Have you ever heard of a thing called microdosing? I bet you have, but do you really know the history, science, and best practices for safe and effective microdosing? Well, Psychedelics Today presents the Microdosing Masterclass, hosted by 2 world leaders, Adam Bramlich, CEO of Flow State Micro, and Dr. James Fadiman, who wrote the first book on modern microdosing. This series of comprehensive lectures is now live as a go-at-your-own-pace class. The list of top-notch guest faculty presentations is too long to list, but they will cover topics like where microdosing came from, its extensive history, and use in animals even, the current research of how microdosing can enhance mood and mental health, with world-leading researchers currently conducting experiments on microdosing, how microdosing can help veterans and other at-risk populations, and so much more. Head over to psychedelic-education-center.com to take the deepest dive currently available on microdosing.